Hey, thanks for joining us on another episode of Construction Tech Talk right here on Iron Pros. And this is another of what we call our We Talk to Smart People episodes, where, as you guessed it, we talk to smart people. We're not falling down on the job on that at all right now because we've got Hugh Seaton with us. And if you're involved in construction technology, you probably know this guy already. And Hugh, you're so busy and doing so many different things. I'm not even sure exactly how to introduce you. So why don't you handle that for us?
Thanks. When you say talking to smart people, I was looking behind me to wonder who else it is, but I really appreciate your having me on the podcast. So I'm the CEO of the Link. I've spent about 2 years working with CSI on the specification problem and the specification industry, and out of that grew a business that we're really excited about. But I got a podcast also called Constructed Futures, and have wrote a book, and I got a big mouth, so I get around.
Yeah. So, there are a number of different, things that you're involved in that probably have a lot to do with what we're going to be talking about today, which is construction technology interoperability.
Yeah.
Because you're involved with things like crosswalk
Yeah.
and a number of other, initiatives. When it comes to that very important aspect of what's happening in the industry, what different pies do you have fingers in?
Well, I mean, I talk to a lot of folks that are smarter about this than me, so maybe I can badly paraphrase what I'm hearing. Um, the idea of interoperability, really you're saying, can I pass data back and forth, and can I pass the results of our software or our work back and forth in a relatively seamless way? That's a problem that's as old as software, it's not going to go away. So I think we're finding ways to make it better. As you noted when you invited me here, that Rivet was just purchased by Trimble, and that's a way that they want to do a better job. Procore was ahead of the game a little bit with their marketplace. You've seen some other things happen on the standards side. The reality is that standards can do some things. Crosswalk helps there. And Crosswalk specifically is a product from CSI that translates between master format and a uniformat, Omniclass, and some other standards. And that's one way to do things, especially when your information is already pretty structured and already pretty classified. So I think, the main takeaway is this is a problem that is getting whittled away and getting resolved from a bunch of different ways. I mean, in some cases like Trimble, they're doing it in a pretty broad organizational way. In other cases like CSI, they've always been doing it at an industry-wide, but kind of narrow in terms of what parts of the process and parts of workflows it's relevant to. So I think that I don't think the problem's ever going to go away. I think it's a mistake to think that someone's going to swoop in and solve this. What you are going to find is it becomes less and less of an issue because systems get more mature. The other thing I would point out is the users themselves are getting more and more sophisticated. So the contractors, the design firms, all of them are growing their IT teams. And in other industries, that's what the IT team typically does, is they connect things into an iPaaS. So one of the things that Rivet built was an internet platform as a service. There are other ones that you can put inside of a company. So Dell makes one called Boomi, which I think is being used across the industry. Yeah. There are a number of others. The reason why Salesforce bought MuleSoft is because they do that too. So the idea of an iPaaS being something inside of a company, it has a lot of power. The idea of an iPaaS being something that's on the vendor side, and in the case of Trimble, also has a lot of power. So I think that we're all circling the same problem. But every time some bright young thing comes up with a new software product, the problem kind of comes up again, and they have to resolve it. So that's part one. And part two, entirely new things like digital twins mean, what are you connecting it to? So the problem isn't going to go away. We're just getting more and more sophisticated at addressing it.
Well, it is such a very broad challenge. And there are as many different solutions to this right now as like there are companies trying to solve the problem. But when it comes to like a good case in point that we can kind of get our arms around, what can you tell me about Crosswalk and who is it for? What difference does it make for people?
Crosswalk started off with the recognition that across the industry, there were a lot of people who had spreadsheets where they would take master format, which, as most listeners will know, is the way a lot of specs and products and other things are formatted, or are classified, excuse me. So lots of folks had spreadsheets of their own where they would take master format and recode things into uniformat, which is often used for schematic design. It's used sometimes for estimating and sometimes for some other things like facilities management, or OmniClass, which is the other one that CSI manages. The realization a couple of years ago was, why don't we stand that up as an API? So software companies, internal IT teams can use it. Facilities managers were finding, also in their case, also an IT team. So really it was addressing a need in the market where we saw people doing it in a rough and ready way and said, well, we should turn this into an API so people can much more smoothly use it, and then do with it what they will.
So what kind of adoption does that have right now? How large of a reach?
It's huge. It's most of the industry, and certainly all of the industry that uses master format, is licensing it one way or the other.
For like a narrow slice of functionality, that I think is a much easier problem to solve. I look at someone like Xtracker that has a standalone change order registry that becomes that single version of the truth that multiple different enterprise systems and companies can plug into as they pass that very time sensitive and mission critical data back and forth. But what do you think are some other bright spots just in terms of like point solutions that are doing this well? And then we'll assault the harder question of like broader applications that really are trying to kind of be the one ring to rule them all.
Yeah, I think the difference between a platform and a point solution is depending on who's selling it and who's buying it. I think it's less distinct than it was. Everyone bemoans the point solution. There really aren't. There are point solutions, but most of them integrate with other things and so on. So it's a tough distinction to make. I'm finding that you're seeing a lot of integration where you're needing a lot of integration. And by that, I mean information passing back and forth. So pre-construction systems like Join and Concentric, there's a couple others out there. They, by definition, need to be passing data back and forth, and they're very good at integration. Some others that obviously the big platforms, I just kind of disproved my own point. When you talk about a Procore, that's certainly the far end of a spectrum of what's a point solution and a platform. They've done a fantastic job from really early on of connecting and making it so that, mind you, they're making you do it their way, but you get to do that when you're in that position. You get to say, look, we're going to be reasonable. And I got to be honest, I've integrated with Procore now twice. They're fantastic. So it's not like the Death Star telling you have to do things or else. But they, on the other hand, they have a product to run. So they have standards internally they make you match, but otherwise they're incredibly helpful. So I think that you're going to see that more and more. I think you're going to see that platforms and companies that aspire to be platforms make it super easy to connect to them, and make it super easy for you to understand how to do that in a pretty painless way. So I look forward to that. You're already starting to see it.
I think that platform term is kind of squishy, because in some cases a platform would be like an Autodesk or like a Salesforce where, hey, we've got a development sandbox that you can work in. And maybe, if you're like an Oracle or a Microsoft, you have like an entire development, tool that folks can use. But with Procore, they're fascinating because they have a partner network that looks to me like the size of a small town. So as soon as you get like that new cool, app out there for construction, the first people they're going to integrate with is Procore. But when it comes to people using like that free version of Procore that's popped open for them as a service by a general, that wants their subs using this, what type of capability do they have to get that data from that Procore project to persist after the project closes to really kind of make it something like more like an iPaaS?
I don't know. I can't speak to that.
Yeah, I have heard of a couple of products like ProNovus, which is a business intelligence platform that has added a capability that will allow contractors to do that. So I think that's super cool. And maybe you're smart about this. You can kind of steer me on this. Do you think that that's kind of the difference between product that's very easy to integrate with and something that's more like legitimate iPaaS, where you will continue to have access to this data and can do things with it?
I don't think persistence of access is what defines it as an iPaaS. I think there's a whole bunch of things that relate to the status of the data. And I think that's going to be a product by product or company by company decision. Related to that might be whether or not they package it for you for easy discovery later. I think one of the things you're going to hear a lot about is it's great that we can pass things back and forth, but most people are going to be involved in some claim somewhere in construction. So how things get discovered later is also, it's not just that it persists, it's that the product makes it easy to go find things later instead of needing, a paralegal to spend 100 hours to go find something. So I think there's a number of things that companies are going to figure out or not, or they might choose to say, that's not what we do. We'll hand it to you and away you go. So I think that's going to be worked out, by the strategy of the company offering it.
If you're a construction contractor, you're middle market, maybe you've got some rudimentary enterprise technology running in your business. As you're going about selecting and implementing different solutions in the business, what kind of questions should these folks be asking vendors to make sure that the way is paved for them to have good success, sharing not only with software products that vendor might already have standard integration with, but others down the road?
I think a couple of questions make sense. One of them is, what's their view? I mean, just ask them straight up. Do you think of yourself as an ingredient in a bigger workflow, or is your strategy to carve out your own sort of sandbox? I think that the days of owning it all are over. There's going to be instances where people try that for a while, but it's just nobody's really doing that anymore. Not successfully, I think. So, to what degree are they viewing themselves as an ingredient in a larger workflow? Maybe they do have 3 or 4 different modules, but do you have to use all those modules, or do they think of themselves as, you know what, you can take the piece you want, and if you already have another solution you like, we'll integrate with them. So I think that viewing yourself first of all, viewing yourself as integration first is important. The second thing, though, is thinking of yourself as an ingredient. There's a final point I'll make that relates to the internal iPaaS we talked about earlier, is companies are building their own systems. Like it or not, they're doing that. This company specifically, I mean contractors. The number of contractors that I hear that are building their own project management system or some part of a project management system or estimating or this or that, we have to recognize as external vendors that you're entering an ecosystem that is increasingly sophisticated on the contractor side. And as a result, you need to be pretty good at that. So that's what I would ask is what's your philosophy, for lack of a better word? And then the next one after that is great. You got a good philosophy. What's your roadmap like?
That's all really good, thought-provoking stuff. And that's really what our job here at Iron Pros is, to help people do the due diligence on this stuff. Or more pointedly, we do it for them so they don't have to, and they can, focus on delivering projects. But what we'll be doing on a regular basis is diving into this topic regularly. Every other week, I'd say, on Iron Pro. So if you want to learn more about this, if you want to learn more about what's out there for your contracting business, keep on coming back and visit For Construction Pros and our other properties too. And we'll look forward to seeing you again right here next time on Construction Tech Talk.